Good morning, class, and all of you that have joined us by YouTube. We are absolutely thrilled to be back here in church again, in person, and we are going to continue our study on how to build strong families and reach our kids God's way. And right now we're going through a series of how to find a good Bible-believing church. And also, we are going to be throwing out some warnings about things that break apart good Bible-believing churches and good Christian homes because of Satan's deceptions. A verse I'd like to leave with you today is found in 1 John 1:7, and it says, "But if we walk in the light, as he is in the light, we have fellowship one with another, and the blood of Jesus Christ, his Son, cleanses us from all sin." Thanks a lot for joining us. I hope we can be of a help to you. If you have any questions, please feel free to get in touch with us, and don't forget to subscribe. Thank you. Join our teacher now, Todd Frederick.
All right, thanks for everyone coming alongside us and in person and online, and you can come by and visit sometime. And we are continuing our study on what we need to do in raising our children for the Lord, because if we don't have a good church to go to, then we are not able to instill in them the values of Christ living and the fear of the Lord, and have them with the right spiritual base to grow up and want to continue in Christianity themselves, raising their family. And if we are in a church that's just kind of a traditional, where it's we do things but we don't know why we're doing them, and not based on the Bible itself, then we get into doing a running machine instead of serving the God of all creation. But what we're doing now is been going through this checklist according to what John Stormer had, as to what to look for in a church, and ask the leadership, the pastors, the deacons, average person in the pew, what do you believe? Because basically they're the ones that's running the church. Actually, the Holy Spirit should be running the church, but they're the ones influencing decision making in the classroom, delving into teaching and so forth, your children and us, that type of thing. So one of the things that touched on the other week, and we're going to drill down a little bit more into it, is he asked the question, if there's an agreement with all these truths, and you can review the previous videos to see what those questions were, then do all the denominations, associations, fellowships, or conventions the church is affiliated with hold to them the previous yes questions that should have been, such as if a person's saved, are they saved for all eternity through Christ? Can a person be saved by trusting Christ alone? Those type of things. If a church can answer all those questions, and are those associations and affiliations and so forth that are tie-ins with the church, do they also support those things? We have, in recent years, probably 2 decades now, I guess, and that type of recent years, but there was like this movement, Promise Keepers, for example. Well, that sounds good and all, but its affiliations were not good, because it would, and their motto was break down the walls, divide us. Well, walls are good in a sense. I mean, if you are driving alongside of a mountainous road, you'd want to have a wall there, in case you're skidded on some ice or something like that. You want to just plunge over the edge. Walls are good because in those walls are the teachings that keep you from just going over into wrong doctrine. So in the Promise Keepers, for example, they had the acceptance of Catholicism. Well, Catholicism is opposite of Christianity with its teachings. So in this business about associations, we have to be careful that who we associate with a church is not going to be in conflict with Christ. And we turn to Revelation chapter 2, verse 14, where Christ is speaking to the church at Pergamos. And he says, "But I have a few things against thee, because thou hast them that hold the doctrine of Balaam, who taught Balak to cast a stumbling block before the children of Israel, to eat things sacrificed to idols, and to commit fornication. And so hast thou also them that hold the doctrine of the Nicolaitans, which I hate. Repent, or else I will come against thee quickly, and will fight against them with the sword of my mouth." So here we have, for example, this in Revelation, the church of Pergamos. You have people that hold to these doctrines of Balaam. Obviously, Balaam was a fair-minded, fair-weathered type prophet. He'd go to the Lord and ask him, say, "Lord, what shall I do?" And he said, "Go down there and speak to Balaam and tell him that I can't curse Israel." So he'd go down there and talk to Balak. And Balak would say, "Well, I will pay you, such and such, if you can curse them." And so he goes back to the Lord, and the Lord says, "No, I can't curse them." So then what Balaam did, he came up with a plan, so he couldn't curse the children of Israel himself. He could let them curse themselves by having them intermarry with the pagans of the land. And so basically that's what's happening here is with church affiliations, we're marrying into pagan teachings, pagan organizations, and even our own startup organizations have become anti-biblical in their teachings. For example, like I started last week mentioning about, and this pamphlet put out by James Melton, he's a Baptist pastor. He talked about how that in the 70s, there was a certain man named Noel Wesley Hollyfield, and he did a study of the subject about the analyzing certain Southern Baptist seminaries, which we know of some that have caved in so much like Furman is now becoming like a state, non-sectarian based organization, but university. But in this 1970s studies, which that's been like 45 plus years ago. You think, well, the further back you go, the more Christ-like you do. But even back then, even back in the 40s, Furman, for example, they were going away from doctrine, sound doctrine. But in this particular university, it was the university in Kentucky. Let's see. It was a study on the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. And this study showed the Southern Baptist Seminary students how they were like when they went into like their first year, questions that had to be asked. And then their second, third, and fourth year. First would be like diploma students, first year Master of Divinity, final year Master of Divinity, and then graduate students. So you could see that when they entered in, they should be like having somewhat of knowledge of God, acceptance of the Word of God, and that type of thing. And then as they would be taught more, you'd think, okay, they're becoming more believing in God. But I touched on this last week. They were asked these various questions. One is that I know God really exists and I have no doubt about it. And the percentage of those was, in that first group, where they were kind of like the entry-level diploma students, whatever, 100% believe that God really existed. By the time we moved to the second group, the third, and finally the fourth group, which is the graduate students, only 63% believed that God really existed. And then Jesus asked the question, the question's asked, is Jesus the divine Son of God? And I have no doubt about it. First group, 100%. Goes through the group, it continues to decline to 63%. So you got, okay, these are people in seminaries. It's not like they're studying electrical engineering, and this is kind of like, but these are people that go in there for a Bible degree, and then these are people who graduate out, and they do a resume, a church pulpit committee says, we need a pastor. Oh, here's one of his that just graduated. Okay, let's let them come in, preach a couple times, we'll think about it, and okay, you're coming in. These are questions that the pastor should be asked. Pastor should be. Okay, so then the third question is like, I believe the miracles actually happened just as the Bible said they did. You think, well, that should be a given. Well, 96% of the first group said yes, and goes down to 61%, then 40%, and then finally the graduate student says 37% believe. I believe the miracles happened exactly like they did. Then this is really unusual because you got to think, what's the pastor do? This is Baptist pastor seminaries, students. So you have part of the pastor's duty is to preach the gospel. Okay, well, if a person's not saved, what do? Well, they die in their sins and go to a devil's hell. That makes sense. So the question was asked, the devil actually exists. Just a completely true statement. First group, 96% of the people said yes. 66%, second group. 42%, the third group. And finally the graduate students, they believe only 37% of them that the devil actually exists. So something is going on in the seminary departments. And I believe it's just like when you look in the secular departments. You got your kids, we train them up best we can in church, and then we send them off to Clemson or Georgia Tech or one of these other secular schools, state-run schools. And what the problem is the faculty. So you have to think, okay, in those they teach basically too, is there a God? You believe in God. They don't do it like that to that degree in seminary apparently, but somehow they're coming out not believing in God, not believing in the devil, not believing that Jesus is the Son of God, and to 100% level, and so forth. So it's got to be in the faculty themselves at the seminary school. So the question also is asked, is there life beyond death? There is a life beyond death. Is that completely true? Survey says, group 1, 100% believe it. That's good. 89%, second group. Third group, 67%. And by the time you get to the fourth group, the graduates, the ones ready to go into the pulpits, 53% of the people believe that there's life beyond death. 53% of the graduates. So I guess you see that that's probably why a lot of the churches are now declining in their numbers, because if there's no life after death, if you don't believe that there's any heaven or hell, and the devil doesn't exist, and all these things here, you have a question as to whether God really exists, 63% of them, then, what's the point of giving out the gospel? Just have everybody come in, put your money in the plate, I'll tell you a little story and homily, and we'll say a prayer and shake hands and go home. If you die, then don't worry about it. There's no afterlife. 53%. Then the other is that Jesus is born of a virgin. This is a completely true statement. 96% of the people in the first group said yes. That's a completely true statement. 66% in the second group. Third group, 33%. And by the time you get to the graduate student, he said there's 32% of those who come out of graduate school as being believing that Christ was born from a virgin. So it's like, you can't have a Christ who's not born of a virgin. But why do you need a virgin birth Christ if there's no heaven or hell? It's just, these are people running the churches. And that's why you see the numbers haven't been as swelling as they were back in the early 1900s, late 1800s. Revivals taking place, churches building on. The last time I saw a church built on, it was like, or being built, I hadn't seen it around too much. Most are being turned into apartments now.
Yes, I was just going to build a little bit upon that point that, the virgin birth reassures us that Jesus is God, that he wasn't born from an earthly conception, and that's why we can trust in his sinless blood for our, cleansing of our souls for all eternity.
But there's no eternity. Being facetious there, that 37% of pastors believe that there is. 53% believe that there is actually. So 47% of them out there right now think that there's no afterlife. So that's one thing, is that we have to, and the problem with the Southern Baptists is that we have this thing called the cooperative program, which works good in some ways, but then the other ways is that you're kind of like like what Jesus talked about, that the tree that was being, that formulates the church has all manner of birds nesting in it. So the problem is birds in the Bible is not a good connotation. It usually refers to that which is not acceptable. So you got this big tree, so to speak, that, like as we give to Southern Baptist schools. Now, unfortunately, I guess you probably could do this. Donate, the church would have to agree to those things to this particular seminary or that one. And we need to analyze who gets what, because if we're just throwing money out, it's like we're sitting there giving money to ones that, like Jesus described here, he says, except you repent, I will come unto thee quickly and fight against them with the sword of thy mouth. So we wouldn't want to be sitting there throwing money out and having Christ coming in, being letting our candle be pulled out and our church fold up because we're compromisers.
Do you remember the couple we met that were going to Swaziland in Africa?
Yeah, you said about it. They felt the call to go to missions, and then he had a beautiful truck he finally had bought, and then this is before he got the call.
I'll tell
Ministry.
Okay. Well, this couple we met, this adorable couple, they were in the Southern Baptist, and they went on this temporary mission trip to Swaziland, Africa, which sounds like Switzerland, only it's a country in Africa called Swaziland. And it's a twice orphan country, meaning that you have children raising children with no living relatives, and there's babies dying on the street every day with no clothes and no food. And so they fell in love with this place, fell in love with the children, really felt burdened to go into the ministry there. But they couldn't be supported by Southern Baptist churches because the cooperative program tells you where to go. It's not like you can have a calling and go to a certain country and have the cooperative program pay for it. So they had to go around and raise their own deputation to all these different churches. But they got a final approval from God that he wanted them to do this because he had just gotten a brand new truck. Some guy came up to him at work and said, "Hey, how much do you want for your truck?" And they were able to sell it quickly. And then they also were, talking to God about, how do we really know this is, a sign too? So they had just built their dream home in North Carolina, and it was just perfect, everything they always wanted in a house and property. And one day they got a knock at the door. There wasn't any sign up in front of the house that the house was for sale or anything. And somebody just came up and said, "I want to buy your house. How much is it?" And so they sold the house, and they're over in Swaziland now. And so it just shows you that God works in spite of these.
Well, he's not going to force his will. Like in that case, I wrote my doctoral statement back some years ago, and then I did a comparison between Independent Baptists and Southern Baptists in the way they raise monies for missionaries, for example. And I said, on the one hand, Independent Baptists, missionary wannabes, have to raise their own support. Some of them have to go from coast to coast. Like one couple we knew of, which he's now, I think that he never did make it to the mission field, but he's now, I think, the chief of police in Belton or something like that now. But they traveled for 7 years back and forth. They wanted to be missionaries in Japan. Well, they never could get their support up enough. That was like a lot of time and resources and so forth. Got to see the countryside. But nonetheless, you have to go and do all this work. Travel here, find out that your meeting was postponed. That's happened before. We've heard somebody go from here to Texas or something like that, and find out, you know what, we just forgot about that meeting, sorry. So then they had to go to some other church, and then somebody else kind of let in, and then they raised the support. Of course, it takes money to go back and forth and all like that, hotels, gas, and truck breakdown and all like that we've heard of too. Transmission coolers where it burn out, and, they're pulling a big trailer. So nonetheless, but then the Southern Baptists, if somebody wants to be a missionary, they go to the cooperative program, and then they say, okay, well, we'd like to be missionaries to, like in this case, Swaziland. Well, they'll look through the list and say, well, we don't think that we have a need in Swaziland, but we have one in Kenya or whatever. So they'll be like, well, I didn't really feel a call to go there. Well, that's what we have a need. So you kind of get redirected in a way by the Southern Baptist cooperative program, which the benefit of that is, the way I put it is that, you know, you get the money up front, so to speak, because they've got all this money here waiting to give to a missionary to go where they need a missionary. So they don't have to do all this traveling and waste years, so to speak. But yet, the other side, with the independent Baptists, making them go here and yonder, I said that helps to eliminate those people who are vacationers versus the vicarious. You know, if somebody just wants to go out to some posh place somewhere and say, I'm a missionary here, and you can support me. And if they were just given a load of money, they might be sitting underneath the coconut tree, and what are they doing? Well, I don't know. We're going to come by and visit you and help out with your mission work. Ooh. And then they go and jump into action, you know. Like, but the other hand is that you're not able to, as Southern Baptists, we don't know who we're supporting. You know, you got a list of people, but we can't say of an individual church that we support Mr. and Mrs. Smith over in Melbourne, Australia, or whatever. Why? Because we give our monies into the cooperative program. It's kind of like a big melting pot. You know, we're supporting, could be supporting a guy like we just described, you know, graduate of which he doesn't believe in virgin birth and like that. So it's like, but this way, if we could get back to supporting, okay, you're going here, okay, we will support you personally, and have the funds available to them. Now, I'm not sure how the situation would be set up for that here in a Southern Baptist church, but in the independent Baptist church, there's a mission board set up that missionary subscribes to, and then you go and send the missionary comes here, presents his work, and you're like, hey, that guy's, I don't really like what their mission is and like that. So anyway, you support him by giving to the mission board of the area that he's from, or that he's with. And then that way you get a report directly on your missionary. Like we've done that with Global Outreach missionaries in Monterey, India. And we get it directly, a report from them, and so forth. And it's pretty neat to do that. So that way you can kind of pick and choose who you want to support. So anyway, that's one thing is affiliation. So with the seminaries being as liberal as they are, that's putting out liberal missionaries, liberal pastors, which produce liberal people. So that's one thing that if your church is affiliated with those type of things is like, okay, let's think about moving on. The other affiliation that I talked about last week, and we'll delve into a little bit more. We don't have much time left now, but maybe 6 minutes. But this was a report in 2018 that was given, I guess according to the number of churches turning in, the number of members that they have. And so the membership actually dropped for the Southern Baptist Convention churches, SBC churches, down to 14.9 million members. I think it was a decline of 100,000. But the reason why this continual decline in members, well, part of it is because people are dying. You got a certain rate of that. But of course, we should be having people be born again, which is going to help replenish the ones that's dying physically and checking out, hopefully saved. So the reason I believe is this, because one is the affiliation here. You've got pastors coming in that don't believe in God, heaven, hell, Christ's death, burial, and resurrection, probably, because if you don't believe that there's a heaven or hell, or you don't believe that there's an eternity to come, there's no need for Christ's death, burial, and resurrection. You can just eat, drink, and be merry. So, of this 14.9 million altogether members of the Southern Baptist Convention, there's estimated over 1 million Freemasons in Southern Baptist. Okay, so those are usually probably people that's going to be in their maybe mid-20s. You don't see too many young Masons running around. Usually they're probably like in their, I've seen most of them in their 50s or 60s and older. But nonetheless, so that comprises about 80% of the Southern Baptist membership. 8%. So that's quite a number. And if you think about how that's the men Masons. Now you got the women Masons and so forth, which are associated with the Eastern Star. And then you have these others that for children, like Demolays, are for the boys, and there was Daughters of Job for the girls, and those are all things in this secret society. That's not included in this note telling how many of those are members. So you got to think, okay, there's a lot of leaven, so to speak. Leaven represents sin and that which is not acceptable to God. So you got these people who are members of your church that are members and serving their time and resources and so forth in those groups, these secret societies. And the problem is with these secret societies is you're serving another god. Now people will say, well, Freemasonry is not religion. But what it is, if you look at the actual teachings, the ones that's in the various roles of teaching, like Albert Pike, he was a Grand Lodge master. He had some great sway in persuading people on what to believe, what not to. You had him. You had also Mackey and so forth. But you see that what Albert Pike said about it was Masonry, this is taken from Morals and Dogmas of Freemasonry, page 104. Masonry, like all religions, all the mysteries, Hermeticism and alchemy, conceal truths from all except the adepts and sages, or the elect. That's not about the elect of, the Bible talks about. But the people that are really high up, not the people who just come in under the first 2 or 3 degrees. And it says, and they use false statements and explanations, interpretations of its symbols to mislead those who deserve only to be misled, to conceal the truth, their version of truth, which is called light, from them to draw them away from it. So, in this, we have people that would come to the beginning of becoming like a Mason. They become like the first degree, second, third, and so forth. But they have to, they're asked, what do you come here for? And they say, well, I come to receive light. Well, in this light is beginning of these unveiling of mysteries, shown forth in allegory and symbolisms and so forth like that. And so what happens is they're coming to darkness to receive light, but in their thinking and way of teaching, they're drawing you away from the light, the true light, and through these mysteries. And they even admit to these the associations that they have, which goes into Baalism and all that stuff. But I don't admit, I'll be able to say a word on that. But then J.B. Buck of Mystic Masonry, he says, drop the theological barnacles, the timeless biblical truths, from the religion of Jesus, and as taught by him, and by the Essenes and the Gnostics of the first century. And it becomes